This is a read aloud of the 604 unit test, tone, voice, and humor in nonfiction. Read the passage, an excerpt from A Cub Pilot, from Life on the Mississippi by Mark Twain. There is one faculty which a pilot must incessantly cultivate until he has brought it to absolute perfection. Nothing short of perfection will do. That faculty is memory. He cannot stop with merely thinking a thing is so and so. He must know it, for this is one of the exact sciences. With what scorn a pilot was looked upon in the old times, if he ever ventured to deal in that feeble phrase, I think, instead of the vigorous one, I know. One cannot easily realize what a tremendous thing it is to know every trivial detail of 1,200 miles of river and know it with absolute exactness. If you will take the longest street in New York and travel up and down it, coning its features patiently, until you know every house and window and lamp post and big and little sign by heart, and know them so accurately that you can instantly name the one you are abreast of when you are set down at random in that street in the middle of an inky black night, you will then have a tolerable notion of the amount and the exactness of a pilot's knowledge who carries the Mississippi River in his head. I think a pilot's memory is about the most wonderful thing in the world. To know the Old and New Testaments by heart and be able to recite them glibly, forward or backward, or begin at random anywhere in the book and recite both ways and never trip or make a mistake, is no extravagant mass of knowledge and no marvelous facility compared to a pilot's mass knowledge of the Mississippi and his marvelous facility in the handling of it. I make this comparison deliberately and believe I am not expanding the truth when I do it. Many will think my figure too strong, but pilots will not. When the apprentice has become pretty thoroughly acquainted with the river, he goes clattering along so fearlessly with his steamboat, night or day, that he presently begins to imagine that it is his courage that animates him, but the first time the pilot steps out and leaves him to his own devices, he finds out it was the other man's. He discovers that the article had been left out of his own cargo altogether. The whole river is bristling with dangers in a moment. He is not prepared for them. He does not know how to meet them. All his knowledge forsakes him, and within 15 minutes he is as white as a sheet and scared almost to death. Therefore pilots wisely train these cubs by various strategic tricks to look danger in the face a little more calmly. A favorite way of theirs is to play a friendly swindle upon the candidate. Mr. Bixby, my chief, served me in this fashion once, and for years afterward I used to blush, even in my sleep, when I thought of it. I had become a good steersman, so good, indeed, that I had all the work to do on our watch, night and day. Mr. Bixby seldom made a suggestion to me. All he ever did was to take the wheel on particularly bad nights or in particularly bad crossings, land the boat when she needed to be landed, play gentleman of leisure 9/10 of the watch, and collect the wages. The lower river was about bank full, and if anybody had questioned my ability to run any crossing between Cairo and New Orleans without help or instruction, I would have felt irreparably hurt. Well, one matchless summer's day I was bowling down the bend above Island 66, brimful of self-conceit and carrying my nose as high as a giraffe's, when Mr. Bixby said, I'm going below a while. I suppose you know what's coming next? This was almost an affront. It was about the plainest and simplest crossing in the whole river. One couldn't come to any harm, whether he ran it right or not, and as for depth, there never had been any bottom there. I knew all this perfectly well. Know how to run it? Why, I can run it with my eyes shut. How much water is there in it? Well, that's an odd question. I couldn't get bottom there with a church steeple. You think so, do you? The very tone of the question shook my confidence. That was what Mr. Bixby was expecting. He left, without saying anything more. I began to imagine all sorts of things. Mr. Bixby, unknown to me, of course, sent somebody down to the forecastle with some mysterious instructions to the leadsman. Another messenger was sent to whisper among the officers, and then Mr. Bixby went into hiding behind a smokestack where he could observe results. Presently the captain stepped out on the hurricane deck. Next the chief mate appeared, then a clerk. Every moment or two a straggler was added to my audience, and therefore I got to the head of the island. I had 15 or 20 people assembled down there under my nose. I began to wonder what the trouble was. As I started to cross, the captain glanced aloft at me and said with a sham uneasiness in his voice, "Where's Mr. Bixby?" "Gone below, sir." But that did the business for me. My imagination began to construct dangers out of nothing, and they multiplied faster than I could keep the run of them. All at once I imagined I saw shoal water ahead. The wave of coward agony that surged through me then came near dislocating every joint in me. All my confidence in that crossing vanished. I seized the bell rope, dropped it, ashamed, seized it again, dropped it once more, clutched it tremblingly once again, and pulled it so feebly that I could hardly hear the stroke myself. Question 1. Read the sentence from the passage. With what scorn a pilot was looked upon in the old times, if he ever ventured a deal in that feeble phase, I think, instead of the vigorous one, I know. How does the word vigorous affect the meaning of the sentence? A. Vigorous contrasts with feeble to show the importance of confidence. B. Vigorous supports scorn to show that pilots were not taken seriously. C. Vigorous follows from venture to show how weak pilots did their job. Number 2. Read the first 3 sentences of the passage. There is one faculty which a pilot must incessantly cultivate until he is brought to absolute perfection. Nothing short of perfection will do. That faculty is memory. Which word from the sentence best creates a lofty or intellectually superior tone? Faculty, A. Pilot, B. C. Nothing. Question 3. What is the effect of the word choice in the phrase, every house and window and lamppost and big and little sign by heart, in paragraph 2 of the passage? A. It makes the example easy to understand. B. It downplays the narrator's intelligence. C. It gives the paragraph a sarcastic tone. Question 4. Read this excerpt from the passage. Well, one matchless summer's day I was bowling down the bend above Island 66, brimful of self-conceit and carrying my nose as high as a giraffe's. Which tone does the phrase, carrying my nose as high as a giraffe's, give the excerpt? A. Cheerful. B. Humorous. C. Absurd. Question 5. Read the excerpt from the passage. Every moment or two, a straggler was added to my audience, and before I got to the head of the island, I had 15 or 20 people assembled down there under my nose. I began to wonder what the trouble was. Which word could replace the word wonder and best maintain the meaning of the excerpt? Dream, A. B. Imagine. C. Question. Question 6. The author uses the word feeble in the first paragraph of the passage and the word feebly in the last paragraph. Which tone does that word choice give the narrator? A. Weak-minded. B. Self-aware. C. Joyful. Question 7. Read the passage from paragraph 4 of the passage. Read the sentence from paragraph 4 of the passage. When the apprentice has become pretty thoroughly acquainted with the river, he goes clattering along so fearlessly with his steamboat, night or day, that he presently begins to imagine that it is his courage that animates him. But the first time the pilot steps out and leaves him to his own devices, he finds out it was the other man's. Which word would replace the word imagine and most drastically change the meaning of the sentence? A. Pretend. B. Assume. C. Believe. Question 8. Read the sentences from paragraph 5. Mr. Bixby, my chief, served me in this fashion once, and for years afterward I used to blush, even in my sleep when I thought of it. I had become a good steersman, so good indeed that I had all the work to do on our watch night and day. Which words from the sentences best show the narrator worked as a cub pilot on a steamboat? A. Steersman and watch. B. Blush and fashion. C. Afterward and indeed. Question 9. Read this excerpt from the last paragraph of the passage. All my confidence in that crossing vanished. I seized the bell rope, dropped it, shamed, seized it again, dropped it once more, clutched it trembling once again, and pulled it so feebly that I could hardly hear the stroke myself. What is the effect of the choice to repeat the word dropped? A. It gives the sentence an eerie, ominous mood. B. It reveals the narrator is nervous and fumbling. C. It makes the tone of the sentence informal.